Hi everyone and welcome to the third episode of my vlog. This is Alex for FNC Poker. If you want to know more about me, please check out the previous videos. In this episode, we're gonna go through the second part of Ray Channel's game, and you're gonna see some big pots, probably the biggest pots that I showed up to now, and to be honest, one of the biggest pots I've ever played. You're gonna see big hands, mostly lost, and some mistakes. A lot of people asked me if I was tilted when I made those decisions, and to be honest, I wouldn't call it tilt. I wasn't like raging or mad or something like that, but I did feel a lot of pressure playing on a big stream game with players that have a lot of experience live, considering I had almost none. On top of this, as I mentioned before, I wouldn't say my routine that day or even that week was very proper, and I do think a lot of bad decisions stem from there. Anyway, not gonna go too deep into this now. Let's get into the hands, and at the end of the video I'm gonna talk a bit more about the challenges that I faced, what I learned from them, and what I think I could do better next times. And at the end of the video I'm gonna talk a bit more about the challenges that I faced, what I learned from them, and what I think I could do better next time. I open king 10 off to 3x from the cutoff, Eusebio calls in the straddle, and board comes down jack 7-3. Considering this board is pretty dynamic, I think it's better to bet polar here. Our hand has an over, backdoors to a straight and a flush, and does a pretty good job blocking a jack. We go for a pot size bet, and Eusebio calls. The 9 of hearts turn completes a flush, and also brings us a double gutter. Eusebio now leads for 1.2k. I think this play is quite good considering he's supposed to have a flush advantage, and I should check back here quite often. I decide to call with my combo draw. The river, deuce of diamonds, is a complete blank, and he now goes for almost a pot size bet. Our hand is a good bluff candidate, maybe even better than the ace of hearts, as he's supposed to 3-bet pre-flop some suited aces, and he might find some bluffs with the ace as well. Not sure how relevant blocking the straight is, but that might also be a plus. We decide to shove, and we take the pot down. I open 500 from +2 over a 200 straddle with 7s. Christie calls from the first straddle. We see a flop of queen 10 deuce, and I expect Christie to make a decent amount of mistakes in a check line, considering he's going to have a very wide range that misses this board often. Although I could make some arguments in favor of betting, I think checking maximizes against his many potential bluffs. Flop goes check check, turn is a queen, which is a good card for us, making it less likely Christie has one. He bets around half pot, and we have an easy call. On the 3 river, he now goes for another small bet, and again quite an easy call considering the odds and his wide range. We take down the pot against his pure airball. I open 10s from the button to 300 and Gauge 3-bets from the small blind to 1.5k. I've seen some wide 3-bets before and I don't really mind taking down the pot pre-flop with this hand. I also think he's going to call a decent amount of worse hands at the stack depth versus a 4-bet, so we decide to go for it. We 4-bet to 3.5k and I'm super unhappy to see another 5-bet to 10k. Even after that ace-king fold, which in the meantime I found out it wasn't good, I still think people don't really find enough bluff 5-bets, and the size is too big for us to call, and shoving 10s at this stack depth felt quite punty. Therefore, I side-told him, gonna believe you as well, and ended up folding and getting bluffed once again. In this hand there were some issues with the stream reader, but what happened is it folds to us in the big blind, we open 6-5 suited, and we get called by straddle. Board queen deuce 3 is quite good for us, as it's pretty difficult for Arish to connect here, and we can bet quite often, even range. We decide to go for a small c-bet with our gut shot, and he calls. Turn is the ace, and this is a spot where we are supposed to be really polar. We don't want to go for thin value bets, and when we do decide to bet, we want to go big. We go for a slight overbet, and Radish calls once more. The river, a king, and we have to go for 3 streets here, I think. We have a lot of value on this run out, we definitely have the net advantage, and we also block hands like 4-5, ace-5, ace-6. Also, obviously, we can't win by checking. Radish has a decent amount of queen x that I expect to fold on his run out. However, he makes a really nice hero call with queen jack, and we lose the pot. Christie opens cutoff over the 200 straddle to 525. I decide to call from the small blind, thinking I don't really have much fold equity. However, I didn't pay attention to Christie's stack. If I noticed he was so short, I would have just folded here, as this isn't a good call at the stack depth. Radish comes along from the big blind, and we go 3 ways to a flop of king 8-5. Flop goes check, 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 the turn is a 4, and looking at the hand now, I would have really preferred to lead small myself. They're going to have a lot of gut shots and pair plus draws that are going to call, and I don't expect many raises. However, we end up checking. Radosh takes the initiative and bets 1k, Christie calls. At this point, it's quite difficult to be ahead, as Radosh can easily have king x or better, while Christie could also have a lot of better pairs. And even if we're ahead on the turn, equities are going to shift a lot by the river against 2 ranges. We decide to fold, and we get bluffed once more. We finally pick up aces in the straddle in a stand-up game where we could actually be quite wide. Reichano opens the hijack with 8-7 offsuit, and we go for a 3-bet of 1.5k. Unfortunately, he just folds and our aces go to waste. At this point, we decided to play a stand-up game, but without standing up. Meaning, if you don't win a hand in a table round, you have to pay each player 200 RON. So basically, if you don't win, you lose 1.6k, which is indeed quite relevant. I open 10s in +1, and I get called by cutoff and small blind. Board comes ace 7-4, and I guess in a normal scenario we should check here, but with the stand-up game dynamic, taking down the pot here becomes more relevant. Our 10s need protection, especially versus 2 ranges, and there's a fair amount of worse hands that could call too. We see bet small and take it down. Gojo is first to act then, he opens to 200, Reichano calls right after, and Eusebio decides to go for a 800 squeeze on the hijack. I pick up ace-jack suited on the small blind, and I think he's going to squeeze quite wide, so my hand is probably strong enough to call for bet for value. Everyone falls to Eusebio, who calls. Board 5-6-3 with 2 spades and 1 club is definitely not the best board for our range, so I wouldn't range bet here. Our value is driven by overpairs, which wanna go big on this texture. For bluffing, this is probably a good candidate, as the hand is too weak to check call or check raise, but too good to check fold. We decide to go for a big c-bet, intending to shove a club turn, and he calls. Turn is an ace. Here, if we decide to continue small, we can keep betting quite wide, including under pairs, as he shouldn't have many ace-x that calls flop for this size. I found it quite funny, someone at the table said this should be a range check turn, which couldn't be further from reality. However, in-game I decide to check, thinking he might get spewy against a range that looks like under pairs. Now, I'm not sure I like this. Eusebio checks back and the river is a 7. A bad river considering hands like 4-5, ace-4 or even 8-9 if he ever has that now have a straight. But it also brings some 2-pair to hands like 6-7 and so on. Going for a small bet here would have been a decent option. However, in-game I thought he's probably going to bluff pretty much any no showdown value hand. He goes for a slight overbet of 16k, which puts me in a quite tough spot. In the meantime, I found out he's a good live rag, so I don't expect him to just bet according to his hand strength, or maybe I just gave him too much credit. I start counting combos, and I think river is very close. This would be a good call if he's turning under pairs like 8s, 9s, and stuff like 7-8 into a bluff, along with the missed flash draws, and if he doesn't slow play turn very often. Still, I'm not sure these assumptions are correct. Maybe let me know in the comments what you think and how you would have played this hand. I called and lost to ace-5, and I was quite upset with this hand. Not because I lost, but mainly because I felt like my thought process was quite inconsistent. Next hand I looked down at aces, quite a promising hand. I opened to 500 over the 200 straddle and the 2 straddles call. Board comes down king 6-6 and I decide to check back. We can't go for 3 streets here, and it's very likely one of them is going to get spewy with a wide range that misses. The 9 of hearts turn brings a flash, and we now have the nut flash draw. We bet 800, and Christie goes for a check raise to 2100. Obviously, we're not gonna fold here with the overpair and the nut flash draw, so we go heads up to a jack river, and Christie doesn't take very long before going all in for 2x pot. I think in pretty much any game, live or online, these lines and sizes are going to be very underbluffed, so normally we should just fold. Here though, I thought there are some other things in play. First, Christie is known as a spewy player, and then the fact that he needs to win the pot not to lose the 1.5k in the stand-up game, and also the fact that I felt the dynamic at the table was quite aggressive, and there were spots where people put extra pressure on me. On top of this, I check back because I do expect him to get spewy. Still, I think most often he's going to go for leads than check raises with complete spews. If we think of his value range, he's basically saying he has a full house or a nut flush, which we block. I don't think he's gonna do that with many worse combos than that. So there aren't many full houses in his range when he calls from the first straddle, as it's mostly just suited combos available. So he just needs 2 or 3 random spazzes to make this a profitable call. Following this thought process, I ended up calling, which I'm not a fan of now. Not because I'm results oriented, but the line and sizing is so underbluffed that all these arguments for calling don't weigh enough. Also, his timing and the fact that he looked really relaxed is an extra argument to find a fold here. We lose another stack and we go for a big winner to the biggest loser. Alright, so as you've seen, this wasn't the best session I've ever played. To be honest, it was the second biggest loss in one session for me lifetime. How do I feel about it? Well, not feeling that bad about the loss, but I feel bad about the way I played and about my thought process. First of all, I feel like my decisions were way too rushed. For example, in the ace-jack suited hand where I called against Eusebio, I felt like I kind of subconsciously made my decision to call and then searched for arguments to do so instead of doing it the other way around as it's supposed to be. I remember on the river I started counting value combos, which were quite a lot, and when I got to counting the bluffs, I was like, must be enough bluffs. And ended up calling, which now looking at it, it's not necessarily true. It is close. I'm not necessarily upset about the call, but yeah, my whole thought process was a bit chaotic from pre-flop to river. It was super inconsistent, so yeah, quite disappointed with that one. The aces call against quad sixes. Again, I wouldn't necessarily call that tilt, but I do agree there was a factor of getting attached to the hand and not really wanting to let it go. On top of that, I ignored every live tile. I guess behind that is the fact that I don't have experience playing live and I don't want to make my decisions based on something that I just suppose. However, in that hand, I didn't even look at Christian. It doesn't take Daniel Negreanu to notice that he was super relaxed there. I didn't even take into account the timing tells and the sizing tells, which are also tells online. But I kind of decided to blank that and just call, which again, I'm quite upset about. Third, I felt like I generally misread the table dynamics. And I think what makes this even worse is that one day before I met someone who played in this game for quite a lot of time, and what he said is, make sure you pay attention because people are going to be loose pre-flop, they are gonna do aggro plays pre-flop, but post-flop, once the pots get big and you get on the river, they are gonna be too needy. And what did I do? I played the exactly complete other way around, where I made big folds pre-flop and insane hero calls post. Last but not least, as much as I would like to say I wasn't influenced by being on a stream game and people seeing it, I felt like I was. I felt like I cared a bit too much about what people say, about what people think. Obviously, there's a lot of exposure, and thinking back on it now, I know if I decide to go on the stream games, there are gonna be a lot of haters, there are gonna be a lot of people talking shit, and yeah, I obviously shouldn't care about it. Most of those people don't even understand or know poker, but at that moment, I did feel like a lot of extra pressure because of it. However, on a positive note, there is stuff to learn from that. After that game, I've paid way more attention to my timing, and also I've been way more aware of my thought process, so if there are flaws in it, I can actually notice them before making a decision. So stay tuned for the next episodes and let's see if I manage to learn something from my mistakes or not.